Good evening once again, dear speakers, in Eugene Anangwe, Mr. Michael, distinguished guests. Welcome again to the third edition of Storytelling Night. Please, I want some energy in the room. I know we are few and the ACs, but we can burn the room, right? Can we? Yes. So today's Storytelling Night has a theme that says bridging borders through stories. And that's what we are going to do. And I would like to invite the Chikomo. My name, by the way, is Commander, and I'm the moderator of today's Storytelling Night. And
okay, you can clap hands for me again. Okay, guys, let me just take this opportunity to say welcome to the Storytelling Night organized by Interact Rwanda. Can we all say Interact Rwanda? So Interact Rwanda is this amazing program called Storytelling Night. It happens after every 2 months. The idea is, can we, most of the time we read books and we watch videos and all these things that we do, but it is so amazing to actually have an opportunity to have somebody share their story so that we can also be able to see the challenges they've been able to encounter. We can also be able to learn from them. But more than that, there are some people we see on TV like the Anangwes, but today you have an opportunity to talk to him, to hear how has it been the journey and all that. Because I always say this, right? When you hear Barack Obama delivering his speech, it's very easy to celebrate Barack Obama, but not the process he went through from Chicago to the White House. And I just feel like this is the best thing we need as Africans. Africans don't really write books most of the time. And they say if you want to hide anything from an African, put it in the book. And the book is that thing that they all don't want to read. But we have our own way, and our own way has always been oral tradition. We love to listen. We love to learn from others. So this is a best thing for us to be able to learn from each other, to be able to ask each other questions. So these people will be coming here today. It's not that they're just here today to share their own stories, but you also have your own story to share. And who knows, tomorrow you might be the person on this stage also sharing your own story. Because I believe that everybody's a book. We all have stories to share. And today is Anangwe, today is Michael, today is her, but tomorrow it's also you to share your own story. Powerful? So this event happens every 2 months, and what we do is we have an opportunity to listen to the speaker who will have an opportunity to share their story. But more than that, there is an opportunity for you guys to ask questions. But today it shall take a different format. It won't be the speaker just talk and talk and talk and talk and then they go. It will be a very interactive session. We shall engage them on certain questions. You also will have the opportunity to engage them. Without wasting much of your time, can we just give a round of applause to Interact Rwanda for bringing such an amazing program? If you are just arriving, like my friend Kizito is just arriving, we are here for the Storytelling Night organized by Interact Rwanda, and these guys are doing a fantastic job. Thank you very much.
yes, that is true. We all have a story to tell, and every day we write our own stories. So without further ado, we are going to have our first speaker, who is Mikel Quintana, and I'm going to tell you small things about him, and then more. We just get ready to ask him questions, right? So Mikel works in Agahozo Shalom Youth Village as a career resource center and fellow. He has found his career path in the field of global education. Outside his work, Mikel loves exploring culture and society through art, music, travel, sports, and especially FOOD. What's that? Food, and we share that. Mikel was born in New York City, grew up in a global spread out family with family in Spain, Mexico, Australia, US, having studied in Ecuador and Chile, worked in Spain, and now where? Where is he? Rwanda, of course. He holds a unique global perspective and passion for experiencing and learning from diverse cultures and society. He graduated from Tufts University in Boston, where he studied international relations and cultural anthropology. With almost 2 years living and working where? In Rwanda, yes, he is excited to share his global perspective on education and the importance of cultural exchange to achieve more empathetic and equitable world. Please help me, join me to welcome Mikel on stage, share his story.
I think I'm going to stand down here because I'm already quite tall, so don't need to add more inches. First, I'd like to thank Interact Rwanda, Julius for the invitation, the moderators for my introduction, and to the audience that is here today, including some friends from Agahozo, some friends from other places as well. My name is Mikel Roberto Quintana. I was born in New York, but the first few days of my life, I was actually called Pablo. Now, my dad was born in Mexico, grew up in Spain before moving to the US, and Pablo is a very Spanish name, but when they decided to call me Pablo, they were expecting me to look more like my father. I look a lot like my mother, who is an Australian, very white woman. So, when I came out, quite pasty, and I was named Pablo, my dad carried me around that whole first weekend, Pablo, Pablito, and he was like, this is not working. So they switched my name to Mikel, which is also a Spanish name, but one that does not have quite the same connotations, right? In stereotypical American society, Pablos look very Mexican, maybe darker skinned. And so my dad thought, no, that name is going to cause him troubles growing up. So, Mikel. As I said, I was born in New York to an Australian mother, to a Spanish, American, Mexican father. At 5 years old, I moved to Australia. At 10 years old, I moved back to New York. And I'll get into the rest of my story as I grow up a bit later. But that importance of moving across the Pacific Ocean twice before I was 10 years old was a very important experience for me growing up because it signaled that my family was very global. And every time we had vacation, every time we had an opportunity to go see family, we did. But it also took a cost on my family's ability to do things like buy a home, have a steady income, right? And so I'm very privileged that I was born with an American passport. I have been able to live on 5 continents now. But I'm not one of those typical kids who maybe the father or the mother is a minister or a business person who has lived around the world. My dad was a carpenter, my mom a massage therapist and yoga instructor, and me moving around the world was more based on my family's background, not necessarily kind of this high level of life, right? So all the money that we had, it was spent on plane tickets to go visit my grandparents, to go visit my cousins. And I'm very grateful that I got that experience. I spent a lot of time in Mexico, a lot of time in Spain. But yeah, so that's a little bit the background of when I was a little kid. Just a little Mikel, or Pablo for a few days. Again, I want to keep this interactive, so if you have any questions as we go, please ask. I know there's a lot of moving parts to my story, and it is one, I think my story is not just of my life, right? I think it's very important to understand my story through the generations of my family. So I shared a little bit about my parents, but I think a big part of my identity today has to do with my family history as well. My grandma, on my father's side, was actually an American woman. And she went to Mexico for an exchange program when she was in university. This is back in the 1940s, 50s, right? So a single woman, 20-something years old, going to Mexico from the US, not speaking any Spanish, was a big thing, especially back then. She never came back to the US. She stayed, she met my grandpa, they got married, and that was the beginning of my dad's side of the family's kind of cross-border, as the theme says, bridging borders, right? US and Mexico, neighboring countries, my grandparents, one from each side of the border. Now, my grandpa's story is also interesting. He was first generation Mexican. So he was born in Mexico, but my great-grandpa was not. He was from Spain. Now, I don't know how many of you know the history of Spain, but in the 1920s and 30s, there was a civil war. And my family in Spain was from the socialist, from the left of the political spectrum, right? Communists. And the civil war was that side versus a far-right fascist dictator called Francisco Franco. Yeah? And so I actually have a great uncle who was assassinated for his political views, and my great-grandpa fled Spain to Mexico in exile, right? So my grandpa was born in Mexico without any documentation, because he was not Spanish, but Mexico did not consider himself Mexican because he was born of a Spanish father. And so on his birth, he had to renounce a Spanish citizenship. He had to get rid of a Spanish citizenship he did not even have so that he could be Mexican. This, coming all the way to now, I now have a Spanish passport thanks to a law that was passed in Spain to recognize the damages that were done to those families like my own who had to flee Spain during that time. But that happened almost 80 years after his birth, right? So now I stand before you today as an American, Australian, and a Spanish citizen. Don't tell the embassies, I don't know if it's quite legal. But yeah, so that's a bit about the background of my dad's family. And that part about the political ideology, right, is something that has been very important. Because as I said, my father was born in Mexico, but he moved back to Spain at the end of the dictatorship in Spain. So the dictatorship lasted until the 70s, 1930s to 1970s. And so he grew up as a young teenager under the final years of the fascist dictatorship. And so the lessons that he taught me are actually lessons that eventually made me interested in coming to learn about Rwanda, because he always said, you know, you grew up in the US, you grew up in Australia, you take for granted these basic rights that today all of us here have, yeah? That those can be put in danger in any moment, and that it's important to always value and fight for those rights, for those freedoms, for that security, so that we can all live in a world where we can be ourselves, where we can be prosperous, where we can have friends, family, without having to worry about those kind of things, right? So that kind of brings me to when I moved back to the US when I was 10. I had grown up in New York City, Melbourne, Australia, two big cities, very diverse populations. Growing up, you know, I was in the playgrounds in New York and Melbourne. All the parents would yell to their kids in different languages. We would all respond in English. But, you know, there was Mandarin, Chinese, Spanish, English, Japanese, Portuguese, all these different languages being spoken. But all the kids would respond in English. When I moved back to the US, I moved to a very small, very white town in the rural part of New York. We think of New York as New York City, but in reality it's a state which is probably the same size as Rwanda somehow. And that experience was difficult for me. Now, for me, I can pass as white, obviously, even though I have Latin, Mexican, Spanish background. For my younger brother, who was born in Australia, but who looks a lot more like my father, that was difficult for him. But I found an outlet. Who here is a fan of football? Soccer, football. Nobody, just one. Okay, well, I'm a big, big fan. right? And I think that it's something I forgot to add in my bio, actually. I love to explore and interact with people from different cultures through music, dance, food, but also football, right? I can relate to anyone. I can show up to a village in the Eastern Province, and if I'm wearing a Barcelona shirt, someone will either hate me or love me, right? I found an outlet in the town I lived in was called Clinton, New York. Small, small town. But close by, there was a small city, maybe the size of Romagana, for example. Yeah? And there was a big refugee population. Refugees from Bosnia, Cambodia, Somalia, Iraq, and many other places, but especially those 4 countries. And I found a football team, which was called Coliseum International. Coliseum was the club. International because we were from everywhere, right? And so my friends, my teammates, were from Somalia, Cambodia, Iraq, right? These different countries. And there again, I found that diverse intercultural experience. And that was very powerful for me. And I learned a lot from them, and I hope that they learned a lot from me as well. And it made me realize, living in this small town with, everyone liked ice hockey. Do you guys know what ice hockey is? It's a crazy sport, I did not know how to skate. It was not a good time for me. And I realized I think I have to leave. And my parents were always very supportive. You grew up in all these places. We want you to be understanding of the world. We want you to go. So at 16, I left home and I went to Ecuador. Who knows where Ecuador is? South America, perfect. Spanish speaking, right? It's on the equator, hence Ecuador is the equator in Spanish. Small country, beautiful. If anyone ever gets the chance to visit, I highly, highly recommend. And Ecuador was very important for me for a few reasons. 1, I left my small town. 2, I had grown up understanding and speaking Spanish, but not in a very fluent way. Like, I could have basic conversations. If my dad or my aunts or my cousins told me something, I always understood, but I couldn't have in-depth conversations. I couldn't have debates or express myself very well. So being in Ecuador, I became fluent in Spanish quickly. It was easy because I had that background, but I was able to express myself better. And 3, I learned something very important that has guided me since then. As I said, my family is all over the world, but now I have more than just my blood family. In Ecuador, I lived with a host family. I had a host mom, a host sister, a host dad, a host grandpa. My host brother was in Switzerland, and I was in his spot in Ecuador. And they became my family for a year. My host mom looked after me, didn't let me do things when I wanted to do them. My host sister teased me, right? Made fun of me, told me she was building my character. And that was the first time I had an experience living in another country by myself, without my family, but with a new family, with a new community. I was very lucky to go, my host mom was a teacher at a very nice school in Ecuador, in Quito, the capital. And it was actually a better high school than the one I was going to in the US. And so I learned a lot. I learned Spanish. But I also got to see something that visiting Mexico as a kid and hearing from my parents, I knew about, but I hadn't lived it, which is the conflicts that inequality can cause in society, right? In Ecuador and most of Latin America, as well as most of Africa, Rwanda, for example, a lot of the world, right? The differences between the rich, and the poor is very big. And I was going to a very rich school, living with a comfortable host family, going to amazing, beautiful parties, right? I was lucky that my host family was comfortable. But in Ecuador, I also saw the poorest of the poor. And that experience kind of opened my eyes in some ways and put me on the track of caring about social injustices, right, around the world, because I was learning about it in Ecuador. So that's Ecuador. I feel Ecuadorian still today. The World Cup is a difficult experience for me. I have US, Australia, Spain, Mexico, Ecuador, well, Rwanda, no, but hopefully one day. um, and I went back to the US. I finished high school, and I went to university. Before I started university, the university I went to, Tufts University, which is in Boston, and people know where Boston is, on the East Coast, a bit north of New York. They have this program where they encourage you to do a year of service in another country or in the US before you start your studies. So while I was in Ecuador, I was like, I don't want to leave Ecuador. My dad was like, hey, but I found this university. It's a good university, and they have this program. You could go live in Spain, right, for a year, and they will pay for everything. I was like, okay. I had not been to Spain since I was 6, but I had grown up feeling Spanish. 2008 Euro Cup, 2010 World Cup, 2012 Euro Cup were some of the happiest moments me and my dad experienced together, right, when Spain was victorious. I had learned how to cook Spanish food growing up, but I had not been there since I was 6 years old. So I was like, I cannot pass up this opportunity. So I went to Spain because I wanted to live in Spain, not necessarily because of the work I was going to do. But looking back now, it's the work that I did there. I was working in a foster home with 4 teenage boys who could not live with their families for some reason or another, right? They were in the custody of the city of Madrid, which is where I lived. And so after they would get back from school, I'd go with them, play football, take them to a doctor's appointment, do homework with them, be a big brother pretty much, right? Eat dinner with them, and then I would go home to my host family, number 2 in Spain. And that experience, I did not think it would be the most important part of my time in Spain. I also connected with my dad's family, learned a lot more about my family history, which was all important. But that part, the work, the unexpected experience, is what has shaped my life the most since, I believe, right? I now work in global education at Agahozo. Who knows Agahozo? A lot of people, right? We have some alumni here as well. So that experience was my first step into working with young people, right? Maybe from vulnerable backgrounds, and supporting them in basic things. Homework, football, right? Going to the doctor, basic stuff. Now, brings me to university. I studied international relations and anthropology. Do people know what anthropology is? So it's the study, or cultural anthropology is what I studied. There's many kinds of anthropology, but it's the study of human culture. So if we take political science or economics, they look at things from a very high perspective. Who's the president? What is the GDP? All those high things, right? Anthropology is like, let's understand Rwanda from a village in, I don't know, some district far away from the capital, yeah? So you're learning about the culture from the people, not from the top. And that taught me how to think in a very interesting way. It taught me that the relationships I make with the people in the places I go, I visit, are what are going to teach me most about that place, right? If I learn about the things that Rwanda exports, and they export coffee, they export this, they export that, but then I go to Rwanda and I realize, hey, most Rwandans, now in Kigali, people are starting to drink more coffee, but a lot of people drink tea, right? Chai. So that's the anthropological perspective. Learning what the people do, yeah? And that's how I learn about cultures, through food, through art, through music, through community, through the relationships I make with all of you, right? And so university taught me to think that way. And it brought me to Rwanda. As I said before, my father's kind of constant teaching of don't take for granted living in a place that is prosperous, secure, right? Where people can be who they want to be. and I was starting to learn about Rwanda's history, and my university had a program where they learn about the history of Rwanda, but especially the amazing growth and development and peace that has come since 1994, right? How has this country come to peace? How have they found justice? How have they found unity, right? And so I was learning about that, and it finished with a trip to Agahozo and to different places in Rwanda. And that was in 2018. I came back in 2019 as the leader of that trip, and then something very difficult happened in my life. In the in the dry season of 2019, in October of 2019, I was studying in Chile, South America again, learning about another country that has had to deal with a lot of traumatic history in the 70s and 80s, and how have they come to a point since then, right? To a place of peace. And I received a call from my mom that my father, a construction worker, had fallen from a ladder, and he was in the hospital. And so I got the flight back home, and 4 days after I got home, we had to pull the plug, the life support, and my father passed away. Did not get to say goodbye. The last conversation I had with him, long conversation, was about I had met this survivor of torture from the dictatorship in Chile. And we had had this long, long conversation, and I had told him about my father's history in Spain and the connections between the two countries and their histories. And that conversation I had with my dad, I still have it recorded on my phone in Spanish, so you would not understand, unfortunately. But that was kind of like, I still listen to that now to remind myself of what am I doing and why am I doing it, right? Because it gives me purpose, that those lessons that he taught, right? And that is why I wanted to come back to Rwanda. Agahozo is a place for healing for vulnerable young people, to get an education, to find family, to find a home, and to heal their hearts so they can heal the world. Now, I needed that myself, right? I was interested in Rwanda already, in the amazing things that this country has done, in seeing if I could be a part of it in some way. But now I also had another reason to come back to Agahozo, to come back to Rwanda, which was to heal myself. I had thought before my father had passed away that I would come back to Rwanda, but after that happened, I knew I needed to come back. And so I graduated university, in 2021, after 1.5 very difficult years, right? My father died. I had an operation on my knee. COVID came. It was terrible, right? I'm very grateful for the friends I had at university that helped me through it all. But I only applied to one job, which was to come back and work at Agahozo. I was lucky enough to get the job, and I came in 2021. Now I feel healed, honestly, right? And it's thanks to this country, but especially thanks to the community at Agahozo. The amount of love that everyone gives each other, the amount of hope and positivity that all of us, no matter what our background or our stories are, have for their futures, for our futures, right? For the country and the world's futures. I mean, like, for those who have been to the US or come from the US, right now it is a place where there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of division. People are not optimistic about the future. People think there's going to be a civil war, right? And being here where people are hopeful, people are committed to each other, to the community, right, is very inspiring. And so I get to work with amazing students who want to be those inspiring people of this country and Burundi and Congo and all these places tomorrow, right? Now, I work in the Career Resources Center, which means I help students apply to universities, I help them get internships, I help them get jobs, I support alumni through that process, right? And a big part of that is the personal essay, which is the essay that is required to apply to universities, right? Some here in Rwanda, but a lot in the US or Europe or these other places where these students want to go. And I support the students through that. Now, it's a very important experience for the students and for myself. They have to be vulnerable. They have to write, maybe for the first time, about their life story. And not just one of, hey, look how bad my background is. Feel bad for me, accept me. Say, look at where I came from and look who I am today, right? Look who I want to be tomorrow. And that's inspiring for me to be able to help those students figure out how to put that into 650 words. It's difficult. Some of you might have written those before. It's a very, very difficult thing to achieve. And it takes me sitting down with the students maybe 6-7 times to figure out how they can tell their story. But I love it, right? It's emotionally very difficult sometimes, but I feel that connection with that person, with their story, right? And I'm able to share my story with them too, so that they can see how they can tell their own as well. So, storytelling to bridge borders is not just something so that we can learn more about each other, it's something so that we can all attain things in our futures, right? My story is one that bridges many borders in a fortunate way, I think, and I'm very grateful for that. And I want to help more people tell their stories so they can bridge borders as well. With that, I think my story is complete.
I think we can do better than that. This is what jealous people can do. No, your clapping was too loud. I could not hear it. I think this is what jealous people do. Those who are not jealous can do more than that. So this is what I want you to do, right? Just take a moment. Maybe just if you have a phone, just raise your phone like this. If you have a notebook, just raise it like this. Whatever you have, don't worry. We are not going to say what type or what. So I just want you to open your notebook in the phone or the other one and just write one thing that you have learned from his story before we go anywhere. Let me give you a second to sip in, because sometimes when we just move on to the next thing, we quickly forget what he was sharing. When you are done, you just raise it again. Let me see. Oh, now I see you guys are slow. In Zimbabwe, you may probably not pass your exams because it's 3 hours and you have to write 5 essays, 7 pages each. If you are done, raise it up like this. Let me see. If you believe that this was a powerful story that has an ability to transform your life, just stand up and clap hands. Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You can take your seat. Thank you very much, Mikel, for sharing your story. I think this was a very, not only powerful story, but inspirational. But even more, thanks very much for the vulnerability that you displayed in your story. Most of the time we hear stories of people that they don't fail, they don't drink anywhere, there is no girl that they've ever seen when they were growing up. They are just perfect in everything. They just share with us some of the things that when we try to relate with them, it's very difficult because they are too artificial than they are human. But from your story, I was able to see the human element playing in the story that you have shared. And my condolences for the passing of your father. I just have my first question to ask you. So we have people seated here today, and I'm also seated here. Very many times we have heard about the importance of diversity, the importance of seeing ourselves in the shoes of others, traveling to other countries, and the knowledge that comes with it. But today I think we are getting a human presentation of that. So I just want you to take me through three things that you think you were able to learn from this traveling to other countries that you have done, but also now that you are talking about the US, you are talking about Spain, you are talking about Europe, and now you see yourself working with a student at Agahozo. I think that takes a lot. So I just want to hear some of 3 things I know there are many, but if you can just take me through that, you say you are missing out by not probably traveling, you are missing out by not embracing diversity, or by not reading about other countries, because we may not need to travel, but we may, read and understand more. So if you can take us through that.
Yeah, so first I want to make clear, as you said at the end, maybe not all of us have the ability to travel easily, right? As I said, growing up, travel for me, I would come back from vacation and people would be like, oh my God, you're traveling all over the place. It's so amazing. It's like, yeah, I was at my grandma's house for 2 weeks in Mexico. It wasn't like I was there on vacation. I was visiting family, So that's first thing. I know travel is not easy for everyone, especially maybe if your passport does not hold as much power as the one I am lucky to hold. So that first. I think you learn so much through experiencing different cultures. And that's why I think it's so important to learn about places, not just through the Wikipedia page, but also to read stories from those places, to hear stories from those places, to hear that human perspective, and to always think about who that story is coming from. You don't want to have a single story of one place, right? You can read one author from Nigeria, you don't know everything about Nigeria, right? Maybe that Nigerian is from a very wealthy family who studied in England, right? So you're not knowing everything about the country. So it's always important to know that each culture, each society is so diverse within itself, and that there's so much to learn about one place. I've been here 2 years. I still have so much to learn about Rwanda, right? So that's number one. I think the other thing you realize is that there's so much to common humanity, right? I work with teenagers from the ages of 14 to 22 sometimes when they're graduating, right? And they come from so many different experiences and backgrounds, but in the end, they're just kids too, right? You can still have fun talking about the same kind of things. You can still relate to them in similar ways that you could relate to anybody in the world. So understanding those shared things of humanity that we have no matter where you are. And the third thing I think that's really important is that once you've been to a place, you can go to places and not learn anything about that place, right? The amount of American tourists who travel to Rwanda, or Western tourists that travel to Rwanda, they go to see the gorillas. Maybe they even take a helicopter from Kigali. They don't even drive on the road, right? The only Rwandans they meet are the ones working at One and Only and, giving the gorilla tour, right? That is a very limited view of what this country is. They'll tell you, oh, it's so clean, the gorillas were amazing, and that's it, right? So you can go places without learning about a place as well, I think. But it's when you do take the time to learn about a place, it's always going to be harder for someone to tell you to hate them.
Yeah.
For someone to tell you that they are less than you. For someone to tell you that if they're suffering something, it's because they deserve it, right? So it's you build empathy by meeting and learning from more people.
Empathy. Let's clap hands for this powerful answer. And I think what I'm learning from him is, sometimes when we talk about bridging borders, we only think about Rwanda to US to Zimbabwe. What about us as, the young people that are in the city? How many times do we visit the village? When we, how many times do we visit the village? How many times do we step in like he's talking about empathy. You need to be there. We see you pitching projects about transforming villages and you've never been there. Your understanding of the problem is very shallow. I think this applies to us. And that brings me to I think also the point of intentionality to say you can visit a place, but it's up to you to learn, right? But I have another question for you. I've studied my primary and tertiary education in Zimbabwe, and I studied my university here in Rwanda. And one of the common denominator between the Rwandan youth and the Zimbabwean youth and all other youths in other countries have been like Nigeria, Kenya, and all this is we want to go abroad. We want to study in the United States. We want to work in the United States. And I'm here with you who has been there, and you are coming down to Agaozo. And I'm just thinking, I am thinking of how can I make it in New York. You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking of how can I make it up there. And here I'm saying, like I've been talking about this. You see the Chinese, they are coming here to mine For us who want to go to China, they're coming back here, and I'm seeing you coming to Agahozo, which means there's something special at Agahozo that a Rwandan might not even think it's that special to call your attention from the so-called developed and the greener pasture that we always love. So I would love to hear from you. What is your message to a young person here who thinks that the only way to make it is being where you are coming from?
I mean, it's something that I have to, I teach workshops and support students through the college application process. So it's something I deal with every single minute of every single day. I mean, what's the saying is the pasture will always be greener on the other side, right? Which I think sums it up perfectly, but it's, I know in my heart, right, that I do not want to raise my, if I end up having a family, I do not want to live and raise my family in the US.
Wow.
As simple as that, right?
You do not want to raise your family in the US?
No, it's a stressful place to live. You
Wow.
have to worry about health insurance, paying $75,000 a year for education. You know, there's a lot of things that are stressful. Now, I'm lucky that I could go live in Spain. I could live in Australia where some of those things are more attainable, right? But I would say that, yeah, people, especially of the US, they have this golden image of what it is. Now, university in the US is a very unique experience with a lot of unique opportunities. So I think trying to go to study there should be an option that you strive for.
Yeah.
It should not be the only option, right? Rwanda now has some amazing universities, which are a lot more affordable, will make you much more competitive in the Rwandan job market. And also the understanding that if you go to study abroad, it does not mean that your life, maybe during your studies, your life will be peachy, it will be great, right? You have a
Because of the scholarship.
Yeah, the scholarship, the university looks after you, health center, dining hall, friends, right? But you leave university, and getting that work visa is impossible. Or maybe you do get the work visa, but you yourself are living in like some of the lowest living conditions possible in the US, right? We have many alumni from Agahozo who have become very successful studying abroad, right? And we talk about them a lot, and it's great that we uplift their stories. But we also have many who have gone and gotten into really bad situations, and the answer for them to heal themselves, to overcome that adversity they were facing in the US or Canada, has been to come back here.
Wow.
So, and we don't talk about those stories
Yeah,
as much.
we don't.
Right? Because they're uncomfortable. They clash with our view of the world. But I think it's important for young Rwandans to recognize, to truly understand that, like, also maybe New York is a great experience. I'd recommend for everyone to go live in New York if you can find a way to afford it, right? But the US is not New York. The US is Kansas. It's, you know, all these places which I have not been to but don't really want to go either. And it's important to understand, as I was saying, there's diversity in Rwanda. There's also so much diversity in the US, right? As a young Rwandan who maybe has never experienced or not experienced racism in the way that you would experience it in the US, that is going to be a crazy experience to go to, right? And so it's something very serious that I try and have those conversations with students all the time, but it is something that is very ingrained, not just here, in Latin America as well, in Asia, I think, as well. The US is this golden kind of opportunity, this golden ticket. When it's in reality, it can be for a few, but for many others, the majority of others, it isn't.
Thank you very much. I think before I actually take another question, I was so touched by something that you said of how when we talk about success, for example, I remember the high school I went to, they pick few students who have gotten the A's and they talk about them, yet they are like 3 out of 106. And you just wonder, where are the other guys? And I think this is a challenge to Interact Rwanda, that maybe for the storytelling night, we don't just need the successful stories. We also need those guys who did not make it, because there's still a lot to learn from their experience. I think you have a question before we put it to the audience.
Yes, I have. Can you hear me? Yes. So before we open the questions to the audience, I also have one question. So thank you again for the job you're doing, helping students to apply and write the essays. So there is this question on Common App that says, what are you going to add to diversity? And that's a very challenging question, So how do you help students not to answer that question by writing, but to think of what they are going to add to diversity every day?
I like the question.
So Agahozo is an interesting organization, right? Everything operates from Rwanda. There's only 6 to 8 staff members like myself who are not from East Africa every year, right? All the other staff members, every day-to-day decision is made here in Rwanda by Rwandans and some Ugandans and maybe someone from Kenya, right? But we do have an office in New York that handles the fundraising and all that kind of stuff, right? So back to that question, I think the Agahozo understands that we cannot afford to take every one of our students to the world, we say, but we try and bring the world to Agahozo. Now, there are a lot of things that maybe it's not the whole world coming, right? Maybe it's mostly the US and England and Israel maybe, but it is like my job is to support students, but it's also to be a cousin, right? There's this big family model, everyone's brother and sisters, they have mamas, they have tantine, grand frère, grand sœur, everyone, and I'm a cousin, right? Because I'm a foreigner.
I saw that on your bio and I was like, what's up with this cousin thing?
So, yeah, so my other name is cousin. And our goal is to try and provide some of that global perspective to the students, right? So that when they leave, even if they're coming to Kigali now, the amount of people like yourself from so many different countries in Africa, from the world now, that they can interact, be a part of a community with those people, is to try and get them to start thinking about that. So we watch movies and have discussions afterwards about the movie, right? We read books, we have conversations. So we're trying to bring the world to the students who, some of them maybe are from Kigali and have experienced maybe more global culture before, but some, as you said, are from a far village in the northern province or wherever in the country, right? Our students come from across the country. And it's important as cousins to try and have those conversations with them. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
I think I'm going to take 2 questions before we move to the next step. If you have a question, just raise up your hand. I'm just going to pick you right away. I see Kizito there has a question. If I get a lady, I would really appreciate for the first round. But if there is no lady who wants to ask, I think I'll get my brother there because I've already taken somebody there. Let's get this question from Kizito. Let's get that one as well, and they get answered once, and we move to the next step. Kizito, go ahead. Sorry, yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
So you can tell us your name and where are you from, then you go on to ask your question.
Okay. My name is Kizito Nyoitimbi. I'm originally from Cameroon. Been here for 5 years now. It's a pleasure to be here. Mikel, Pablo, I must say my heart is gushing gratitude for being here and hearing your story. I think the depth and soul in your story is it's like food to the soul, and I'm really delighted for you sharing it. My question is, you have traveled a lot and been with these communities, and I think one of the most important things that I notice across different communities is different values. So what are some of the values you found, let's say for the community you lived in Ecuador, in Chile, what seemed to be the top value they had, and how has that impacted you as a person?
Thanks, Kizito. I think before you answer, let me just take and you answer them once. There was a brother there. Please give him the microphone before we come here. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hervé, and I was privileged.
The country, and you go on.
I'm from Rwanda.
Okay.
Grew up and I was born in Ivory Coast. And I had a pleasure to work with Mikel in Agahozo. I don't have a question, I have more like a comment, so I can maybe do it after you.
Okay, thank you very much. But you can just say, it was a nice speech. I'm joking. Yeah, let's take the brother there. My light is even lighting. I think this speech was so good that even my phone is reacting. Yes, my brother, let's get your question. Just tell me your name, your country, and straight to your question so that we are on time.
Thank you so much. My name is Rukundo Etienne, but also young people call me Steve. I'm a software developer at KFTV, Kigali Film and Television School. I'm like extremely or tremendously, like it's a tremendous privilege for me to meet this guy because we have a lot to share. Like we both speak Spanish. Yo hablo español con fluidez, aunque no puedo hablar como
boy! That's why I love Interact Rwanda. Languages are here, people are connecting. Yeah. This is amazing.
So it's
hablamos
amazing.
después, ¿eh? Hablamos después.
Thank you so
gracias.
much. I taught myself how to speak that from internet. So
wow.
Yeah.
Guys, why are you not clapping your hands? Oh, are you joking? The internet that you use to watch TikTok videos is making somebody learn a language. Are you not worried about yourself? Okay. Please ask your question.
Thank you so much. My question is, it's not like a question, it's just his perspective. What do you miss most about South in the past and that whole past experience? You know, because you went through
what do you miss most about?
His past and that whole past experience. Another, I can't call it a question. What do you do, or what would you do if you go back? Let's assume that we reverse your age. What would you do that you didn't do, and what didn't you do that you can do today?
Thank you so. How do I say thank you in Spanish?
Muchas gracias.
What?
Thank you so much, my brother. Unfortunately, because of time, I'm not going to take another question. I hope you will be very patient for the next guest because we don't want to enter into somebody's time. But also to the guest who will be answering the question, if you can spend 2 minutes to just answer all of them. I know you won't finish what you want to say, but there's always time to interact with them during the networking session. Thank you.
So to Kizito's question about the values that I think I learned from, I'm going to generalize a little bit, which is not fair, but from my dad's family, from Ecuador, from Chile, they're all Latin American countries. And I think it's something that I found really important here when I came to Rwanda, and it felt comfortable in some ways, was the importance of, in the US or maybe England, Germany, right, the northern parts of Europe, the family is kind of considered like the parents and the children, and then the grandparents, the cousins, the aunts and uncles are secondary, right? But in Latino culture, my dad's family, the host family I had in Ecuador, the host family I had in Chile, and also the family that I have at Agahozo, the understanding of family is like much broader. Maybe it doesn't have to do with blood, and if it does have to do with blood, it's like, you know, your third cousin is your cousin. There's no need to call them a third cousin, right? And so that's something I really appreciate. I didn't get to see my family all the time growing up because they were in Mexico and Spain and Australia, and it's expensive to fly to those places with 3 kids and 2 parents, right? But when we got together, it was like we had no time had passed at all, right? And it was really special. And so that's something I really appreciate about living here as well, is that understanding of family. To the question about what do I miss most about my past? That's an easy question. So, no, I've had the privilege to make so many friends, to make so many families, right, around the world. And leaving, it's always very bittersweet because it's like, wow, I feel so sad to leave because I don't know the next time I'll be able to come back. And it's amazing to feel that connection to those people, and you realize that maybe in the moment that you're leaving, like how much you love these people, right? How much you have shared with these people, with this community. But that inability to like, I should have studied finances more, I guess. Like that inability to go back every 2 months to go visit my host family in Ecuador, to visit my host family in Spain, to visit my friends from university, right? I've like gotten used to, maybe from my upbringing as well, seeing family every 2-3 years, right? There's understanding that it's going to be difficult to see those people as much as you would like to see them. And so I've gotten surprisingly good at goodbyes, or hasta luegos, right, in Spanish, see you laters, but not knowing when that later is going to be. And so that's the hardest thing, the not being able to like, And it's hard to keep those connections, right? Now we're lucky that we have ways to do so, and I try my best, but it's difficult. And so, yeah, that's what I miss most about my past, is all those in-person connections with all those people that were so important in my life.
Wow, a round of applause, guys. A round of applause. We can do better than that. We can do better than that. You can stand up, you can scream, you can, celebrate. Celebrate. It's very good to celebrate each other. The way you want to be celebrated is the way you gotta celebrate others. Man, thank you very much for this amazing presentation and this amazing story. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Wow, this was very insightful, right?
Very insightful, right? You guys are jealousy. Come on. I cannot bring the next guest if you are still like this. You guys are was this insightful? Okay.
Since we are shifting to Spanish, let's all say mucho gracias. Loudly, mucho gracias. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.